go to work every day for that minimum wage. There's a guy, blonde hair, blue eyes, just about your age. Hasn't worked that half as long as you. He makes twice as much money as you do. Red blue, red blue, red blue.
There you go. It is October 2nd. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people. We look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast on the Gwe, CKWE, in Tandanega. You can find us at www.ltnradionet.com, and of course, we are streaming live on Facebook. So if you're catching us on the on the internet and you want to see what we look like, then you can. I welcome you to join us on Facebook, and there you can also comment and interact a little bit with us in kind of real time. I mean, I can't read the comments while I'm doing the show too much, but at least during the breaks I get a chance to catch up on them, and of course I got Jake pointing out something. If something jumps off the page, he'll clue me in as well. So, again, I'm John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer. I'm joined in studio by Ross John, my good friend, and he's kind of our host. He's provided me the space for this studio, and of course Ross sits on council with the Seneca Nation as well. Also got Jake Proud in studio. Jake is manning the cameras. He's our video engineer, I guess you would say. He is recording the show for not only for the Facebook live stream, for what we'll post after we're live, but also for our Let's Talk Native TV YouTube channel, where we post this show and we produce other videos, which we will have another one coming out this week. We're going to address the Ay Caramba, Columbus Day coming up. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, too, in the lead up to it. But I also want to thank Kelly McMillan, who is our studio engineer, helped us put the equipment together, and that's how you're hearing us today. So, again, I appreciate you giving us a listen. And, well, let me get into it. As I posted on my promo for the show on Facebook, the big news was... and I didn't really get a chance to talk much about it on Friday because I didn't have a lot of the information. It wouldn't be till Saturday morning that some of the information would come loose from Paul Deister's budget that he proposed. He kind of proposed it late Friday, so he can miss some of the news cycle, I think. Paul Deister is the mayor of Niagara Falls, and he submitted his budget. He said, this isn't the budget that I want to submit. It's the one that I have to submit. It's the one that I'm forced to submit. And of course, he laid it on thick about the Senecas. The Senecas depriving him of his much-needed revenue. A $92 million budget. It's interesting because he wanted to, in the worst way, list an anticipated revenue in the city budget from the Senecas. But the state comptroller warned him, and in fact admonished him time and time again about including gaming revenue as if it was a tax revenue, as if it was an expected revenue. It wasn't supposed to be treated as a city revenue, and Deister wanted to put it in there. He wanted to put in almost $12 million into that. So what he did was he didn't list it as, I don't know if you're aware of this, Ross, but he didn't list it as anticipated revenue, but he listed it as a bill that they expect to be paid. To me, that almost seems more arrogant and, almost, I don't know, it's more presumptuous.
I think it was his bailout position. I think he's going to kind of still try to fool everybody, within the city and the voters, because he's trying to win another election for some of the seats up there.
Well, and let's be clear, part of the problem that the Niagara Falls has faced is they have used the gaming revenue that they've received to balance their budget, which was not what it was intended for.
Right.
He specifically, even when he was releasing this budget on Friday. I listened to his speech, and he even said, although he dissed it off a little bit to city council. Well, city council used available gaming revenue. Obviously, it was made available for this purpose, but used available gaming revenue so they wouldn't have to raise property taxes since since when? Yeah, 92, I think.
Yep.
They haven't raised revenue.
It's been
a long time anyway, and I mean, so it's kind of ridiculous, or maybe it was I don't know. It's been a long time anyway. So they haven't raised any land. I mean, and there's a cap on how much you can raise property tax, and nobody likes to have their property tax raised. But if they had raised it a little bit, when within that cap, not the max of it, but just within the cap, then they could have, I don't know, they probably could have had a surplus. They certainly wouldn't have had to use quote unquote available gaming revenue, because I mean, when you talk about what they were trying to do to position themselves for re-election, that's one of the things they can say. Hey, we kept your property taxes down low. Yeah, but you did it, with smoke and mirrors.
Right. Well, the other thing, people up there are talking, and I have a pretty good ear to the ground up there, is that he still wasn't willing to cut any of the positions up there.
Yeah,
they're
no
really
layoffs whatsoever.
Right. And so some of the taxpayers up there are starting to look at it and saying, you raised our taxes, but you didn't really control your budget.
Right. I mean, he moved some people around, moved some people from the golf courses from the city golf course to the park, which I don't know how that saves anything, really. I mean, that didn't even make sense to me. But no, there was, other than attrition, people who are retiring from jobs or vacancies that occur, they didn't, they didn't trim any of the employment down, the city personnel down. And now people are, and the property tax, the residential property tax isn't really the big hit is,
right.
And obviously that's where you hit more people, but that probably wasn't significant. But where the non-residential properties are the ones that got hit, they hit like 14%. It was pretty significant. And that is the kind of taxes that you don't just have to be a Republican to suggest that kind of increase in taxes is counterproductive in terms of economic development.
Look, what the money was supposed to be used for, what we anticipated it to be used for, was so that we could help them control their tax base by investing back into not just revenue generation enterprises on our property, but also reinvested into businesses and industry within the city limits, within the county, within whatever we could do. But it was meant to build up their tax base.
The point is they should have created revenue with this revenue.
Right.
And if they had done more of that, and there are any number of ways they could have done that, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist or even an economist to figure out, if you've got $250 million that's been made available to you for over a decade, then there are ways that you could have turned that money into revenue generation. Now, Deister did make a lot of boasts about how much their tourism is up. Of course, not attributing any of that tourism
right
to the Seneca Niagara Casino. And even as he boasts about tourism at the park, again, not acknowledging that a lot of that park tourism doesn't translate into meaningful revenue increases for the city.
Right.
Which is part of the problem.
Well, because it gets siphoned out into Albany, the state, the capital.
Well, and Delaware North and some of these other companies that are really involved in all of the vending there. It's not necessarily a Niagara Falls boon. It is it's a very contained. I mean, that's kind of the argument they make about gaming, right? They say, well, gaming is all self-contained. There's not a whole lot of economic benefit to the region, which really isn't the case. I mean, when you consider, there is a decent sized chunk of the revenue that comes into Seneca Gaming that comes from people coming across from Canada.
Sure.
In fact, there are a few people who are going to come from Canada, Niagara Falls, Ontario, to Niagara Falls, New York, for a better look at the falls. I mean, you get a better look at that.
You got a better look on the other side.
So if to lure Canadians, you needed something else, and obviously the Seneca Niagara Casino is a draw, and there's other things that people come for. They shop at the outlet malls and stuff like that. I mean, so Yeah, but again, you've got to do something for that. And as much as he wanted to brag about some of the new hotels that are being built, the problem is the city isn't going to see revenue from those things for quite some time
Right.
because of the tax abatements, the pilot programs that are greatly reduced taxes, all kinds of problems
And
like
that's
that.
the only people that are building there. When you talk about the Delaware North and everybody else, they're gonna tie into a package like that, and so they're gonna actually take away taxable dollars in order so that they can build their business. The trouble with that is that soon as that starts to dwindle, they start looking for another place to go.
Right, right.
They're
And
just going to depreciate out everything, and you know,
well, I think
it's political favoritism.
and you think
Yeah.
about it, if these things aren't successful, then you end up having the city on the hook for this stuff. I
Sure.
mean, and that's where Trump comes to mind. Here's a guy who's built golf courses in places like Puerto Rico that are suffering, the adverse effect of vulture capitalism. And Trump is one of those guys who got all kinds of money from, you know, from the city,
Right.
San Juan and others to build a golf course, and then when the golf course wasn't successful, left these huge debts behind, and that's the worry about something like this. Now, I'm not suggesting that those hotels that have been built or that are in the process of being built can't be successful, and they certainly can be. But again, when I look at the major things that are being done in Niagara Falls, obviously Seneca Nation leads the pack in terms of not just building the gaming facility in the first place, but expanding and renovations and all that other stuff. But even when I look at, the major construction on things like the Robert Moses Parkway,
Mm-hmm.
that still isn't bringing people. It makes it a little bit more of a pleasant drive to go to the park,
It's meant to send them to the park, by the way.
but it isn't sending people through, any of the establishment. It isn't directing tourism towards any of the places that need to have a boon for
Not
their
downtown,
not downtown,
not
no.
really any part of the
Yeah.
city.
So
It's
the hope
all
is they're
on
going
the
to fill.
fringe,
Yeah, they're going
all
to
into the park areas.
fill some hotels, perhaps, but again, the park is fairly self-contained. So, but again, I listened to his speech and his presentation. He must have mentioned Seneca gaming revenue at least a half dozen times, if not a dozen times. Just really laid it on thick about about what a travesty it was and what a hardship it is. Really kind of confirming my video from last week about this addiction or dependency that Deister and his fellow party line city councilors. They all have a hand in this stuff. This isn't just Paul Deister. So he's easy for me to point to because it's because we have history, I guess. But no, this is really kind of a long-standing problem. Even some of this problem predates Deister.
Right.
But he has tried to massage this thing and tried to be the tough guy when things kind of got adversarial with the Seneca Nation, even when the state had created the breach in the
Right.
compact back from 2009 to 2013, those 4 years. Deister was on the front line, threatening to deny fire department access and all that other stuff. And I gotta say, as I look at this budget, what's noticeably missing is the fact his failure to come to the table and say to the Senecas, look, can we count on you for some payments on certain services? Even if it came to $2 or $3 million a year, he never did that.
Look, we extended our hand numerous times, and that's what we were trying to convince them to do. Is that, look, you're going to be you're backing yourself against the wall. First of all, this money really isn't owed to you. You've been misspending it in a way that it really isn't authorized to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the Seneca's responsibility; it's the state's responsibility, and you're not supposed to use it like a tax. So you've been doing all this all along, and it's time to clean this up. So how are we going to do this? And they didn't want to come to this conclusion that their budget was going to be in a position that it is now. But you're right. We could help alleviate a lot of their problems by just saying, okay, what are we responsible for paying? Right now, they're keeping us away from the table.
Yeah, so they are incurring some expenses, but because of their failure to come to the table, and the reason they're not coming to the table is because they are so. I mean, Deister himself is so packed in behind Andrew Cuomo that he doesn't want to usurp that.
Right.
Which is, this kind of goes back to even the conflict, like I said, from 2009 to 2013. But you look at the situation look, he wasn't going to get $11 million out, but if there were some expenses that could have been defrayed and some other things, and and even beyond that, you guys extended that invitation beyond covering expenses. You said, look, there may be some projects that we can do together, and I think Niagara Falls is trying to do some investment for economic development, but perhaps if you guys had partnered together, there might have been some cost sharing issues and some other things that could have been done together.
It could have been, and that's what we're talking about. But more and more, it looks like the reality is we don't need a city to invest in this in the surrounding communities.
Well, and that,
we can
that
do
actually
it directly, to whatever groups are willing to step to the table. Whatever,
and that goes for
developers.
Buffalo and Salamanca as
Sure.
well. I mean, because Mike Smith and Byron Brown have been somewhat apprehensive to come to the table too.
Right.
And so what they do is what they risk is any help in their municipal budgets,
Right.
because you can do something good for the area that they might benefit from a revenue standpoint in the long run, but it isn't going to be dropping $5-10 million in their city budget. It never should have been in the first place.
Well,
but that's not what you're anticipating
but part
going forward.
of it also is that there's no real comprehensive idea of how anybody's going to work these municipalities into the tourist destinations that they want to be, or entertainment and those kinds of things. See, the thing is that we should be an integral part of it. We don't need to own it, but how do we all work together? And they can't even work together, honestly, with their own developers.
Yeah.
Unless it is somebody that's going to come and just take all the benefits. And that's the one thing that they don't understand is that, we'll develop in a different way. We're not probably going to use their tax incentives and those kinds of things.
Yeah, abatements and all that other stuff,
No,
pilot program.
It's a whole different program.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it like I said, it's unfortunate that that both, that he based this whole budget on what he's considering to be this devastating reality that that Seneca gaming revenue isn't going to be giving him $10 to $12 million a year anymore. But at the same time, sacrifice the opportunity to recover at least some expenses and some shared expenses, and look at some of the other things they could have done together. Ultimately, like I said, it makes sense that you guys will reach out to community leaders that are not necessarily city councilors or elected officials necessarily.
Sure.
So I mean, it is what it is. I mean, obviously this budget has to be approved yet. I'm sure Tom DiNapoli is going to have something to say about some of this stuff. And again, Deister can make all his assertions he wants, even as he's presenting this budget about his. What did he say? Something about being some sort of optimist. That this thing is going to get resolved in arbitration. And look, I think what's going to get resolved is the misread that the state has had on this thing, and I don't know how it goes any other way. Anybody who reads the compact, and that's the part that still I find so disturbing, is that people aren't reading it. It's funny because the video that I did last week, most of that script, I guess you would say, was also a column that ran in the Niagara Gazette.
Yeah.
And I looked at some of the comments that came from that as it ran, and most of them were pretty positive. Most of them were saying, at least positive from a Seneca or from a writer standpoint for me. But there was a comment that somebody made, and I think he's somebody who's worked for Deister's campaign or something. But the first, because somebody had posted it and said, you should read this article about John Kane. And this guy posted and says, it's not an article, it's an opinion piece by a Seneca, which is interesting because it clearly says in the article that I'm Mohawk. And I couldn't help but suggest that this comment was emblematic of the entire problem in the first place.
Sure.
When it's in plain black and white that I'm Mohawk, he wants to dismiss the commentary by suggesting that I'm too biased because I'm Seneca, which I'm not, obviously. Which is kind of like those guys not reading the compact in the first place, where it says 14 years. It lists no payments beyond there. And when I look at how Cuomo and Deister and others are trying to avoid the reality of what's in black and white.
Sure.
I mean, even when I looked at the procedures for arbitration, when I think about how much Cuomo and his team are avoiding the reality of what's in front of them in order to make this case. Like I said, I think it's not just a bluff. Part of it is a bluff, but I think part of it is him trying to go through and check these boxes so it looks like he's being the champion of the people, until it gets through, like you said, through election and other things along those lines. But at the same time, eventually this catches up to you.
Look, you can't even have that was the whole point with trying to sit down with the municipalities, the mayors and the city councils and so on, is the fact is read it so that we can have a real conversation about it. We don't want to be talking riddles and and what ifs and those kinds of things. This is the position. This is why we're telling you that we'd really like to sit down, because this thing's, if you're going to be part of a restructure of how we can help do something to help elevate the economy and so on for these cities, it's going to be on this terms of what this compact really means.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to read it. Everybody wants to just look at it. And really, the problem is they're looking at it as a political document.
Well, and in saying that, I mean, one of the things that keeps getting said over and over again by many passersby, I guess, or the average John Q. citizen, who doesn't see or who is trying to defend Niagara Falls or Buffalo or any place else. They have this belief that because the state entered into a compact with the Senecas, that the Senecas automatically they owe the state simply by virtue of having a casino, as if that was a gift from the state to the Senecas. They're not understanding that the state couldn't do gaming.
But John, it goes into the other area of racism.
Yeah,
and most of these people don't even realize that they've marginalized us in their minds so far that they don't even understand what they're saying.
Well, and I guess
to
put a finer point on that, the point is that they don't believe we have any rights except for what they give us.
That's right.
And I know when people say, "Oh, not the race card." Yeah, the race card. Oh, by the way, can you buy those at Hallmark? By the way, I don't know what race cards. Anyway, no, but when they say that, they're not understanding what we mean by it. I mean, because if your immediate, entrenched position is or thoughts on the relation between native and non-native is that we can only do what the state or the federal government allow us to do, that is a complete misread. And because I've said this over and over and over again. I even said this down in NIGA when I was in Washington. I said, look, neither the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act nor the Supreme Court ruling that was only a year before it, the Cabazon case, neither of those things gave us legal gaming. The Supreme Court in California, that Cabazon case, all that did was acknowledge what we already knew, that we had the right to do it. And IGRA didn't give us the right to do gaming. You know what IGRA did? It gave the states rights that we didn't give them. But the federal government says, we're going to give the states the right to be involved in Indian gaming. That's what they claimed they were doing. Right. And, of course, it did a couple of other things. It cleared the way, I guess, for vendors to know that they had a underlying federal law that allowed them to operate contracts with native gaming under IGRA. So there was no question about the legality. The problem with vendors that we engaged before IGRA, they were always threatened. They were threatened by the other states that they may have done gaming in. They were threatened by the federal government, even when it wasn't clear. But they were always threatened. Well, you're dealing with those guys. That's not legal gaming. The feds never were able to establish that us doing gaming, whether it was high stakes bingo, whether it was casino gaming or anything else, they never won a case that said we couldn't do that.
Right.
And even in their courts.
Which are racist to, you know.
Exactly. I mean, which is based on bias, on domination. Going all the way. Again, we can get into a whole doctrine of discovery, conversation there as well. But I mean, I do not pull any punches. I'm perfectly willing to address when Cuomo says something that is racist, like the Senecas have a history of breaking deals, breaking agreements. The media lets that totally slide.
Sure.
They're totally prepared to embrace Cuomo's narrative, and that is, to me, that is the inherent or almost unique racism that the media, that state and federal politicians, and much of the general public has, even when they don't think they're being divisive about it. And when people have that attitude,
because
it's there.
the things that they get pushed back on, in racism, they're getting pushed back by civil rights. They're getting pushed back by the Bill of Rights and all those things that United States citizens have, are supposed to be their protections.
Mm.
They don't know how to deal with it. They're not realizing that they're dealing with people that are bound and determined and rightfully sovereign and free. They can't prove that there is any moral, legal, or any kind of other way to reconcile that. They don't even want to go back and look at the history because it'll prove them wrong.
They can't accept the fact that the foundation of our sovereignty is not built in their Constitution.
Right.
So when we say that there are things that we have the right to do on our lands, especially, they start going through their law books. Right. I mean, even simple things like taxation. I know you went to a tax meeting about state tax. They start looking in their books and they say, "Oh, wait a minute, no, we can tax you if you." It says, when did we give you that right?
Right.
See, the whole thing has been turned around to where they assume they have rights unless they gave us a right.
That's where it is, and that's racism.
That's racism. All right, we'll take a bit of a break. We'll go out with a little bit of Indigenous Holocaust. We'll be right back.
Took his son from his home, yeah, they pulled him apart. They took a daughter from her home, they were forced to depart. Amongst the others on the train, they called the Iron Horse. Another native fell victim to their Holocaust. The devils came to the village, posing as priests, stealing children from their homes, took and placed them in a school to erase them and undo what they labeled as savage. Before the gates of long ran, she had tossed in a pound like it was garbage, stripped down from your customer type. Your skin scrubbed till it bleed, put his clothes in a fight, and bury his items, replace them with ours. Give him a Bible, teach him to read. Preach him indeed. If he speaks one word of his tongue, no song sung from the homeland, which he learned as a young buck from an old sage in the village to a school made of brick. Where they plan was to kill him, save the man was the motto. Sodomized by a priest, traumatized, getting beat, cooling rations when he eat. Many die cause they starved, no one notified. Buried in the yard for not following the cross. Our offenses for my ancestors. Your heart beats through me. Took his son from his home, yeah, they pulled him apart. They took a daughter from her home, they were forced to depart. Amongst the others on the train, they called the Iron Horse. Another native fell victim to their Holocaust.
Sounds good. Forget. I'm not sure I could. They say time heals everything, but I'm still waiting.
She came from a family of 5. She was 9 at the time when they came to pay the people a visit. Would have made them translated the language. They promised beautiful things that she attended without mentioning the evil they imposed. His hands clammy and they go as he shakes with a smile on his face. Now she on her way to call out. With no knowledge of her fate, he tell her calm down. Calm now, we at the gate. She see the faces of her schoolmates saddened in both. They sat her down, cut her hair and made her wear proper clothes to look civilized. No more living like a tribe lies. So if you try to speak a word in your tongue, your mouthwash was the punishment amongst others. Girls raped and made mothers, babies born, babies murdered, women sterilized, I acted genocide. You heard me, the government, cause we didn't die, we survived. They took his son from his home, yeah, they pulled him apart. They took a daughter from her home, they were forced to depart. Amongst the others on the train, they called the Iron Horse. Another native fell victim to their Holocaust.
Sounds good. Forget. I'm not sure I could. They say time heals everything.
All right, thanks for coming back. That is again Indigenous Holocaust to the Dixie Chicks laying it down underneath there. So some good stuff there. Hey, look, I want to thank my sponsors. Among them is my guest here, Ross John, and his wife Holly, and the RJE family of businesses. Eric White and ERW Enterprises. Good friends like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice and Neville Spring and Sugar Montour and many others who have helped this program continue to educate, entertain, and inform for over 7 years. And I thank all of you for joining in the fight and doing your part. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming, as well as thank CKWE for both the simulcast and the rebroadcast of as well. And Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio, all of you for carrying Let's Talk Native on their networks. And, of course, all of you who share the program. And there's a couple of ways to do that. My wife usually, she's right on top of this. She's usually sharing the live stream as we are streaming. And you can share the live stream on Facebook, but we also put the show up on SoundCloud in terms of audio, so it can be shared as an audio clip. And of course, by tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, usually Jake has the YouTube video up of the show from the previous night, and that's another way to share. Look, I also want to recommend that people subscribe to our YouTube channel, because as we do more, and some of these videos are going to be not just concentrated on the fight with the state and these municipalities over gaming revenue. In fact, this week I'm gonna do a video on Christopher Columbus and the some of the debate that continues to rage on about what next Monday will be celebrated as, whether it's Indigenous Peoples Day or Columbus Day or not celebrated at all. So I'm going to do a video this week. Tell some harsh facts about Christopher Columbus, but also raise the question about why it is that American Italians, or Italian Americans, however you say that, of all the people, of all the people they could have, chosen as their national hero, why Columbus? So anyway, I'm going to do a video on that, and we'll talk about that a little bit here. But there's a couple things. Couple of things I got to talk about. Obviously, there's this thing that happened in Las Vegas yesterday, and and I'm not going to make light of any of that. It's just a terrible thing when somebody, when people die needlessly. It's why I'm so adamant against things like war. It just doesn't make sense to me that that people will commit their sons and daughters to fight for. What? For national interest, whatever that means. But, hatred and divisiveness, which is now really at a all-time high. And it's not just racism anymore. I mean, the fight even between the alt-right and the anti-fascists and then everybody caught in the middle. There's plenty of people who are against white supremacy who are not necessarily, anti-fascists. Or anarchists or any of that stuff. I mean, most people, at their core, I think, want to do the right thing, but there's just so much pressure and so much anger that is bred in people. I mean, I think about what's transpired with with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee last year, first sitting out the national anthem on a couple of games in preseason, and then ultimately after talking with a veteran said, look, I don't want to disrespect, I don't want any of this to be interpreted as disrespecting people in uniform. It's not about that. He says, what I'm trying to do is raise awareness that I don't think that I can, in good conscience, stand and salute and respect a flag for a country that refuses to address the racial injustices, not just on Black Lives Matter and cops killing unarmed black men, but just people of color in general. And the crazy part is how this thing has expanded. I want to talk. I mean, I posted a meme, a couple of memes actually, and I want to discuss them because I think the way my own thoughts even developed on this thing. And here's what somebody had sent this to me, and it was in quotations, and it was posted as a meme, although I never saw it on Facebook. I got it sent to me as a message. It says, racism is so American that when we protest racism, the average American assumes we are protesting America. So that's what was sent to me. And it was in quotation marks without attributing whose quote it was. So I didn't really want to post that one. So I posted something similar. So what I posted was, racism is so American that when people of color protest racism, white people think we are protesting America. Now, that got a lot of shares and a lot of likes, and it stimulated some conversation. But, then I got thinking about it. I'm thinking, you know what? Perhaps if we're protesting racism, we are protesting America, whatever America means, right? I mean, so I commented on my own meme. I said, and perhaps we are. And so then I decided, let me post another one. So this was the third generation of that first meme that I saw. And it says, racism is so American that it turns out when we protest racism, we are protesting America. Now, I know the first reaction from the haters is, oh, yeah, they always got to talk about racism. All those people of color got to do that all the time. Rah, 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 rah. So, no, I get that. But here's my point. The country has a foundation, doctrine of Christian discovery. I talk about it on the program all the time, codified into law by Justice John Marshall in 1823, is cited even as recently as 2005 in an Oneida land claim case by the liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So the idea that racism, and of course the doctrine of Christian discovery says that that the people that were here first didn't own the land, that we couldn't own the land. Why? Because according to church dogma out of the Vatican in the 15th century, Native people, if they weren't Christians, then they couldn't claim title. That only the Christian nations of the world, and meaning the white Christian nations of Europe, could assert what would be internationally recognized as land title. So I mean, and when this gets codified into law, you have John Marshall saying, no, Native people, they didn't own the land. They just lived there. They were like the deer. They just had a right to occupancy. But even that wasn't respected because, during Marshall's tenure on court, the Removal Act would come through. Started by Jefferson, pushed through by Jackson. So even the idea of the right of occupancy was not respected. And of course, here's the other thing, is that there's a major contradiction. Even when you consider Marshall making this ruling in Johnson v. McIntosh in 1823, you go back to 1794, 30 years before that, and the federal government is saying to the Senecas and others, we acknowledge that your land is yours, and we'll never claim your land. So you got John Marshall in 1823 saying, oh, no, Native people can't hold title to land. They don't have the right to title. They only have the right to live where we say they can live, I guess. However, 30 years prior, you've got George Washington, the president of the United States, authorizing language in a treaty that says, we fully acknowledge that your land is yours. And you know what? It wouldn't even just end there, because right after Marshall's ruling in the 1830s, when the Removal Act was in full swing, in the attempt to move even us, the Haudenosaunee, including the Senecas, to lands west of the Mississippi, the Senecas asked the question. They said, well, if we went to Kansas, how would that land be held? The United States had to make a specific response to the Senecas saying, if you move, that land will be yours, just as the land you are leaving right now is yours. It's yours, and we will never claim it. It'll never become a U.S. state. Of course, lo and behold, Kansas and Oklahoma, two of those stars on that flag, right? So, I mean, I say all this stuff because this is the foundation of racism. So today, not just when black people, but when Native people are raising issues, just as we did in the first half hour, about this condescending view that state officials and federal officials and many people who buy into this Hup Hup America stuff, they don't even know that the foundation of their beliefs is based on this superiority complex that they have. And that's where, so when I say, when we protest racism, it turns out we are protesting America because so much of the American fabric is based on white supremacy, on white domination. It's got some church mixed into it, but at some point the church was just a tool for white supremacy. And of course, the church used white supremacy as a tool for themselves. So it was like a symbiotic relationship. But now that we live in a world where really, frankly, people aren't they aren't into religion that much anymore. They say it and they use it, and they'll hate on gay people for religious reasons or whatever else. But at the end of the day, it's again it's a tool. So I mean I bring all this stuff up because I think people have to realize that unless you can separate racism from the foundation of America, there are going to be, and I mean United States, but I also mean Canada. I mean, because let's be clear, this is as big an issue on the Canadian side as it is on the U.S. side, and in fact, it's a big issue anywhere where the colonial countries of Europe impose themselves on other peoples. I mean, Puerto Rico is a perfect example. But look, we are standing up to racism, and until more white people, until more U.S. citizens are willing to say, yeah, I got to let go of some of that. And there are plenty that are. I mean, or there are many that are, put it that way, not plenty, but many that are letting go of it. And that's why the allies that we have, that show up in places like Standing Rock or any time that, that we have a conflict, all those people who weighed in on my Niagara Gazette column and some of the other stuff that, some of Todd Gates's comments in the Buffalo News. I mean, I look at some of those and I realize, man, we got a lot of support. And look, we're not just asking you to have our backs. What we're saying is do the right thing. And if more Americans, U.S. citizens, Canadian citizens would be more prepared to do the right thing, then, we could affect change and change for the good. I mean, you might find it to be a little bit more of a peaceful world to live in, I might add as well.
Well, I just kind of add my 2 cents in here is that, this week is that we're going to be sitting down with NAACP, New York,
Their division?
Yeah,
Okay.
their division. And, they're having a conference in Niagara Falls. But they asked for some dialogue. And one of the things that, I want to ask them and have asked certain ones of them is like, there's something that's going to be inevitable that's coming is that within 25 years, this country is going to be more
brown
people than it is white people. And how are they going to view that world? And so you go 50 years, you go 60 years. And it really becomes a nation of primarily brown people, through intermarriage and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But it's just like, how are you going to view the Native people? How are you going to view, these constitutions and everything else that have held your people back? Are you willing to truly look at them and make some changes?
Right.
And for me, it's like, I may not ever say it, but I'd like to start the conversation and say, look, we got to build a healthier situation because even with the black people and the Hispanics, is that the church is starting to die out for the white people. It's hard to reconcile, that behavior and that dominance and the way that it was used to have that dominance and give permission to take over land, South America, all the islands. All those places when they get hit by hurricanes that nobody wants anything to do with. Yeah. So, those are things that we want to ask them. What are you going to look at? Because you're going to have a lot more sway in 50 years on what's going to happen with the environment.
Right.
Than you do now.
And especially,
how are you going to organize?
Especially if they organize.
And who are you going to organize with in order to try to make some common sense?
Well, because, NAACP stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Right.
And there was a time then when the expression colored people meant black people because they were the dominant non-white presence in the United States. Native people, we aren't a big group, especially because a lot of the other brown people, which I would say Hispanics fit into. If you're brown and you're Hispanic, you're really an indigenous person. But I think because of that fear of being so marginalized as an indigenous people, they know that as Hispanic people or Latino people or Chicano people, that they represent a bigger number than even black people. So, but again, how do we bring some of that together and realize that that as people of color, that we have some significant common interests and probably more that binds us together? And I don't mean just against white people.
No.
But how do we organize not just with people of color, but even the people, white people? I mean, to say, look, we have different solutions,
right,
that haven't been tried yet.
But I think some of the things that you're saying now, with all the, we'll talk about the shooting. Some of it is this pressure of Caucasian people feeling that change and knowing that it's happening, where they're starting to become a minority. That their system, that their economic system doesn't work for them.
Right.
What they really wanted, a lot of them voted for Trump because they just wanted him to keep kicking.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about, and they live on these hopes that they can keep this dominant kind of lifestyle going.
And I don't know what the shooting may have been, not so much that ideology, but an ideology that opposes it. I mean, this is a guy who was actually his partner was a person of color. So he may be the opposite reaction. But your point is that there's major tension that is building.
There's tension that's building, and nobody's really looking at it.
Yeah.
They're not looking at this tension of this evolution that's happening in a country where all of a sudden, within a very short time, hopefully in my lifetime, that a power shift's going to happen. And
the politics isn't matching it.
No,
and the systems of governance aren't matching.
That's
where organizations
the
like
oppression
NAACP
field coming on, is that they're going to still try to hold on. You look at the gerrymandering and all the rest of that kind of stuff. That's a Supreme
Court case going for right now. Hey, look, we only got a few minutes left. I do want to address, and we'll talk about this more going forward. But again, next Monday some will celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, and the lion's share of the country, the federal holiday is going to still be called Columbus Day. Banks will be closed. Government workers will be off. I mean, there'll be all kinds of reasons for people to not go to work. Kids will be home from school. And here's the thing and I alluded to it earlier. Columbus isn't what he was purported to be. He wasn't an explorer. He was a capitalist. He was a guy who was hell-bent defying what everybody else said about, the size of the planet, not just the shape. Everybody knew it was round by then. It was very well established. But he, in pursuit of wealth, convinced enough financial backing from Queen Isabella from Spain and to fund a voyage on some whim that he might be able to find a shorter route to India. He was closer to India when he was sitting in the ports of Spain than the moment he set for sail. He was sailing in not just the opposite direction, with no hope of getting closer to Spain, because he didn't know he was off by 2 continents and an ocean and a half, Pacific Ocean and half of the Indian Ocean. And when he made it to the Caribbean, he was farther from India than he was when he was in Spain. This was not a heroic explorer. This is a guy who was trying to get rich, and he was bumbling. He was an idiot. There were others who said, no, the reason you can't sail west to get to India is because the sheer massive size of the earth, you can't make a voyage that long. They didn't, even not knowing that there was continents in the way. So again, to the Italian Americans who want to, and I know this was all just a game. Somebody wrote a story about Columbus, tried to make him into a hero. Italian immigrants were looking for a hero. The Knights of Columbus would be formed, which is a Catholic organization, kind of like the Owls Club and the Elks Club and the Moose Club, all that stuff. And so these organizations would gain some notoriety, especially as a Catholic organization, promote Christopher Columbus, even amongst Anglo, Protestants, and they would promote Christopher Columbus. And the sad part is there are some Italians that are much more deserving of that praise. And I listed a few here. For one thing, in our Doctrine of Discovery film, Newcomb and Wolfchild's film, they talked about how Columbus made it to the Caribbean, but it was John Cabot,
Right.
who sailed under the British flag that would go to North America. John Cabot, I thought he was English all this time. And then I checked it out. No, he's Italian.
He's Italian.
He's actually from northern Italy, kind of like, not the same exact area that Columbus is from, but and only a few years after Columbus would go to the Caribbean, John Cabot would essentially, as an explorer, as a map maker, as a cartographer, would make that journey to North America. Didn't have to rape anybody or take slaves or any other stuff. Didn't do any of the, and he was Italian. Actually, he's known as John Cabot, but he was actually Giovanni Caboto. That's John Cabot.
Mm-hmm.
But you also had guys like Amerigo Vespucci, not known for raping and pillaging and plundering either. Look, as a native person, I'm still not crazy about this whole idea of white people discovering us. But
Right.
But for you Italian Americans, you got Cabot, you got Vespucci, you've got Galileo, you got Leonardo da Vinci, you got Michelangelo. There are all kinds of Italian figures that you could have propped up, but somebody put it in your head that it was Christopher Columbus that had to be your hero. And so as more and more information comes out, and the reason more and more comes out is because we're just paying more attention. Columbus wrote all this stuff down. We knew about the rape. We knew about the sex slaves. We knew about feeding babies to dogs because they wrote all that stuff down. And in fact, even people from the church like Bartolome de las Casas would write this stuff down about these excruciatingly painful things that he had to witness. Why? Because this was the deviant kind of guy that Christopher Columbus was. So when you prop those statues up at Columbus Circle or in Central Park or off of Niagara Street in Buffalo, or name your universities and your cities after this guy, look, know who he is. And and I dare say, because everybody says, well, we shouldn't really take the statues down. Maybe we should just teach more about history. Well, if you teach the true history, who's going to want the statues up?
Right.
So that's my point. I don't condemn Italian Americans at all. Maybe a few who sit in the governor's mansion. No, maybe a few, but not because they're Italian. I mean, I'll condemn people because of their deeds, not because of their ethnicity. But I got to tell you, there's a whole lot of Italian people that I think are noteworthy, that are praiseworthy, that are historical giants compared to Columbus. And that's going to be part of what I talk about in the video that Jake and I are going to put together this week. So, I wanted to throw that out there. Look, we're a week away from this day, but I think when people question what is it with Native people? Why do they hate Columbus so bad? Well, you're gonna learn more and more, whether you want to learn it or not. You're going to learn more and more about this stuff because we're not going away, and we're going to keep the conversation going about this because, again, I know people hate to hear it, but this is kind of that unique racism. Look, because when you can launch somebody up into the stratosphere in terms of hero worship that doesn't deserve it, you have to understand what it is that the people actually did.
My position, is nobody deserves it. I'm against the hero worship all the way around. I don't understand why people have to do it. If somebody ever wanted to throw up a statue of me, it's like, you're only going to tell half a story or one page of my life that I might have done something honorable, but
the rest of us will tell the rest of the
story.
Right.
I've been slugging to it like everybody else. And so you're not going to tell the truth about who I am, and I don't deserve it.
No, exactly.
Neither do any of these people, not just Columbus. It means that, again, you're gonna put a false dogma out there about heroes and patriotism, and that's really what you're putting out. You're not putting out free thought. Yeah. You're not talking about the truth. When any of these statues are put up.
Yep.
And I try to do my best, and we as Native people sometimes fall into that ourselves. And I kind of try to put my feet into the ground and slow us down a little bit because it's like, no, let's not go there.
Well, I had somebody approach me a number of years ago that said they wanted to, they were looking for funding. They already had some, and they wanted to create a Native American Hall of Fame. And I told him, I says, yeah, that's not really our thing. And he just looked at me, was like shocked. I says, no, that's really not part of our culture to elevate. The idea of elevating people up, that's actually counterproductive, and it goes against our ideology. And I said, that's why, when we have titles, for instance, that we bestow on people as a service, that they become servants of the people. We don't let them take that title to the grave because somebody else is going to have to fill that same. There's a whole,
Sure.
And when we tell stories, we actually make up names and make up, characters in these stories because we aren't trying to tell a history. We're trying to tell a parable. We're trying to tell a story that people are going to learn from, not be blinded by the character, but
Right.
more so learn from the experience.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean,
That's it.
so no, I look, and you go through Central Park, and not only do you see Columbus Circle, with Columbus on the huge pier, but you see statues all over the park, and it's like
Promoting that ignorance is their culture.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's a lie.
Yeah.
All of it is a lie. I mean, it's not the full truth. Let's at least put it this way. But that seemed, because we didn't do that, we didn't have culture in their minds.
Well, I mean, and just before we go, 2 examples of just statues that make no sense. I mean, again, right in front of the Museum of Natural History is a statue of Teddy Roosevelt on a horse. On one side is a half-naked native person with a headdress on, and the other side is almost a completely naked black man. Now, this is the 20th century depiction of Teddy Roosevelt. Why is a black man naked? Beside Teddy Roosevelt. And you know what? And when I talk
Why
to
is
some,
Teddy Roosevelt on a horse?
yeah, I mean, why? I mean, and I talk to white people, it says, I never noticed those other 2 guys in that statue. I mean, how could you see? So you were just that blind. Now, the other one I got to mention, I mentioned it before because, especially with my friends from Hawaii, there's a statue in Hawaii of William McKinley that they have, and I think it might be in front of a high school named after him. I'm not even sure, but there's a statue of William McKinley, and they show him with an annexation treaty in his hand. No such thing ever existed.
Right.
So that's how false the statue and this idol worship can be. So, again, we're going to talk more about it as we go forward. Obviously, we're going to stay tuned on what's happening with the state and Deister and others, Cuomo and Deister and others as we battle into this this conflict over their misreading of the Seneca Gaming Compact, and we'll keep posting. And of course, again, my thoughts and my concerns, my condolences to the people who lost loved ones and all of the tragedies that took place in Las Vegas. Look, there's no sense to be made of it, so don't try too hard. Let's just try to get through it all, and we'll see you. We'll see you back here. Today's what? Today's Monday, right? Yeah. So I'll see you back here on Friday. I got to get my days straight. We'll see you then. Yahweh.
12 years after Wounded Knee, but what about the math?
He's 5'2"